and engagement seminar. We are very happy to welcoming all of you and the prediction modelers and the machine learning people as well. Today we are like joining efforts between the two groups, the two seminars. But for us, for Jude Dinley and for me, is the first, also this first PPI seminar. And we are very happy to be organizing this. It is not going to be only seminars, which is also a great thing. We are going to be scheduling seminars on related topics on PPI that we think that can be of interest of many of us developing machine learning, prediction modeling, or just doing statistics and data science across different fields, particularly obviously on healthcare. But also we would like to create a Teams channel where people can share their experiences, resources that they might find interesting to share with others. That because more or less we are all in the same situation, we are aiming to understand the best ways to introduce, to involve patients in our research and finding the more suitable ways of doing so. So I think that there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of scope on the moment. And yeah, we would like to be sharing all of this with you. And so Jude Dinley is a VRC team leader and myself as well. So we will be leading this. And very happy to be receiving your suggestions. If you want to put in the chat your emails, we will be very happy to be adding your addresses to our mailing list so that you are informed of any event or seminar that we will be organizing. So thanks everyone for joining. We will gonna be recording this email. If anyone has a problem with it, just please let us know in the chat. If not, we will consider that everyone is happy with us recording the meeting. And then there will be a space for questions and answers by the end of the talk. You can just raise your hand or open your microphone and make your question. If you would like to type it in the chat, we will be also very happy to be just reading the question for you. Our speaker is already with us. Very happy to have him with us today. Really, thank you, Sagar, for accepting our invitation for this first meeting. Dr. Sagar Jilka is an assistant professor at Warwick Medical School at the University of Warwick. He's leading two large, very interesting global mental health projects. He has a background in data science and patient and public involvement, and he was previously working as a data scientist in industry and was also the coordinator for the patient and carer involvement and engagement theme in the VRC as well. So we are like replacing him in some way on the job of VRC representative here at the IUPPN as well. Today, Sagar is going to be talking about participatory modeling. How can service users support development of machine learning models? And we are really, really looking forward to listen to his presentation. So Sagar, when you are ready, feel free to
Thanks,
start.
Raquel.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and then please let me know if you can see the slides and if you can hear me. One second.
Yes, I can see the slides. We can see the screen. Yeah, full screen now, and we can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm I mean, Raquel's already kind of given an introduction. So I think it's useful to know that I come from a kind of a data science / neuroscience background. So I've always been familiar with I guess modeling concepts. But in 2017 I joined the Maudsley BRC as the PPIE coordinator, and I was in that role for almost 5 years, and that's where I did a lot of the PPI. So in this talk, you might have probably heard some of this stuff before, like why is service user involvement, why is it important? So apologies if you already have, but I think it's useful to just kind of set the scene, and then kind of talk about my experiences of trying to combine those two worlds, like PPI involving service users and carers, into the kind of day-to-day work that data scientists or quant researchers do. And when I say how to involve, I'll focus more on kind of more practical things like research projects that I've done. So what is service user involvement? Yes, I mean, you might have some of you might have seen these slides, or some of these slides anyway, from previous talks I've done, particularly in the BRC when I was there. But when we talk about service user involvement, you might have heard of various terms like user-led research, service user involvement in research, patient and public involvement, engagement, participatory methods, or this is all, they all I guess come under an umbrella term, but what we're talking about here is involvement and participatory modeling. We're talking about involvement in a more direct sense. So we're not talking about things where, you recruit some patients for your study, you just use them for some measures, or you have a, summer science festival, fair at the Royal Society or something like that, where you're showing the public your research. It's more involved than that. And I always use the definitions. Involvement is a means of improving research, not an end in itself. And you do that by carrying out the research with members of the public or with patients rather than, for them. And so that's the kind of basic principle. And as you all know, probably generally, particularly, as I know in my experience of doing research since, BSc, MSc and PhD level is, we as researchers are always in control in a way of what we do. Like, we design the study, we design all the documents, and then we go ahead and recruit patients and or participants, and then analyze the data and that kind of stuff. And even when we're applying to NIHR, traditionally, the funding has been controlled by non-users, non-service users or carers or people from a public capacity. So, and in my experience, users often have only been brought in to maybe conduct the field work. Like, I've seen, particularly recently, like job adverts, service user research or this kind of stuff, and they're maybe just there to collect the data and discuss the findings, or at least some dissemination activity. So this comes down to the way we see research. This is the typical kind of research cycle. You have a basic science discovery, early translation, rate translation, dissemination, and adoption. And you only see patients and public at the dissemination and adoption level, whereas the argument is actually patients and public should be right at the start, plus in all of these other columns, right? So irrespective of data science, irrespective of machine learning, just in the way we view science and think about science, we should be involving non-researchers, non-specialists in all aspects of this. And this kind of upside down pyramid highlights it. So you have increasing levels of PPI as you go up. And so you could start with none, or you can just give information. So you can inform patients, you can consult, involve, or you can have true partnership. And that's where patients, they initiate the research and they lead the project. There might be a PI on your grant, or joint first author or something like that. And in my experience, what partnership has looked like is, as I said, being a co-investigator or a co-PI on a research project, identifying research priorities. I know in the BRC, in the Maudsley BRC, there's lots of PPI done work to identify the research priorities, developing information sheets, carrying out data collection, even analyzing and interpreting that data. So think about kind of involvement across the whole lifeline, not just in a particular phase or in a particular period. So okay, so that's what it is, but why is it important? And this kind of just sets a scene, because there's this Lancet paper in 2009, which basically showed that 85% of biomedical research that we do, you doing the BRC, is wasted. And it's because at the very first level, the questions being asked aren't of use to the patients. They're the things that probably we as researchers are interested in. And so they pointed out lower priority questions were addressed, important outcomes were not assessed, clinicians and patients not involved in setting research agendas. And this then leads to research waste. So no one's even bothered to check, okay, is this going to serve the service user, the end user? So on the back of this, like when I was in the PPI role in the BRC, we carried out a series of studies. And I'm showing you this just to kind of highlight what service users can provide. They can provide a different insight, and then I'll apply it to the kind of the data science field. But for example, there's a group in the Maudsley BRC called FAST-R. They often review patient information sheets and consent forms. Some of you might know of it. While I was there, I used to coordinate that group. So what would happen is a researcher would send in their information sheets. So please, can you advise on kind of jargon or language, or does this make sense, or terminology, that kind of stuff. And then, we'd sit with a group of service users and kind of go through the language and then give the researchers some feedback. Some of you might have used the service. And I wanted to basically understand, like, what is the impact of people using this 4-star service? Like, does it make the documents more clear, relevant? Like, what? Okay, it's all well and good in the kind of life cycle of, doing PPI, but what's actually happening? So one thing we're looking at is something called a flesh reading grade. So in Microsoft Word, you guys might know, but you can obviously do your word count. You can look at how many words a document is and how many characters it is, but you also get this Flesch Kincaid grade level. So for example, in this example, it's 10. The complexity of the document, this random document, example document, is 10. And there's various guidelines that say that a document should be like level 8 or under, which corresponds to like US grading. And so we were looking at various mental health apps to look at jargon and readability. And so you see here a recommendation that consent forms be written at an 8th grade or lower, so patients can understand it. And we asked service users, okay, can you read? We gave them a bunch of kind of consent forms, a bunch of like terms and condition documents, various documents. Okay, what can you make sense of this? And they basically identified various things. And what we did was look at what the Health Regulation Authority, what they say in terms of their guidelines for documents, and what the reviewers found. And obviously there's a lot of overlap. There's things that the HRA want, but what service users wanted was things that were not pointed out by the HRA, like guidance that you get, official guidance. So, avoiding repetition, adding clarity on inclusion exclusion criteria, ensuring that the order of text makes sense. Often we'll put things in a certain order that makes sense for us because maybe analytically we're looking at it, but from a chronological perspective, it might not make sense. And some of the service users often mention that using inclusive phrasing, and that's something that will obviously update as the world evolves. And they often pointed out things. So if you look at table 4 here, these are suggested alternative wordings by reviewers. So we often use terms like activities of daily life, acquire, altered, application. And they gave us service users gave suggested wordings. Okay, actually, rather than saying activities of daily life, can you say daily activities, intact, working well, and then they flagged basically jargon. What do we mean by adherence? Anticipatory pleasure, biopsychosocial approach. They didn't know, right? So often the point I'm trying to make is often we use words because we know them, but it's often important to take the view of the person receiving it. And service users provide this insight across all aspects of science. So here, this was a piece of work we did with Mattia and the neuroimaging team, basically taking an information sheet, and service users then said, actually, if you did X, Y, and Z, this is what we gave them. If you did X, Y, and Z, it will help us make sense. And then it produced this. So it's just to highlight that across neurosciences, psych research. So, service users are helpful. So I was going through this experience. I was having these experiences during my time in the BRC as a coordinator, and I thought, actually, how does this apply to data science? Like how is it involved in data science, and why is it important? Or I was having these kind of thoughts, and I often went back to my PhD. In my PhD, I was collecting fMRI and MRI data, so scanning people with a traumatic brain injury, TBI. And doing lots of cognitive assessments like memory tests and Mechler test of adult reading and those kind of standard cognitive tests. And before putting them in the scan, I would spend like 2 or 3 hours with them doing these tests, choice fraction time and these cognitive tests and matrix reasoning and that kind of stuff. And in those 2 or 3 hours, I'd obviously get to know these people, and often they'd be high functioning individuals, people who'd been working in a bank or CEOs of banks or whatnot, lawyers and doctors and surgeons, and then they've had a car crash or fall off a bike or something like that, had a TBI, and their life's basically turned upside down. And what I found interesting was, at the end of my PhD, what I was focused on was a spreadsheet of, patient ID, psych scores, and MRI data. And all this other rich stuff that I knew about them wasn't kind of implicated in the data. It was just kind of in my mind. And so that kind of made me think, well, sometimes it's important to put numbers into context for a start. Behind most of the database we look at is a person, and maybe their experiences are shaping the way they're responding. So if somebody's scoring high in I don't know, PHQ-9, what is the underlying message, and can we kind of capture that? Or can we kind of capture the meaning of that, and incorporate it in some kind of model? So I started thinking, can we think beyond a number? And if we can't, then how can we at least involve them to help us make sense of the number? And the other thing, this report came out, and I think in 2017 or something, which really highlighted like the issues of bias. This is a really good YouTube video on YouTube, which I think Google published, about human bias. I mean, I think most of you guys are modeling people, so you all know about this. So maybe I'll skip over this. But what surprised me was, we all know about kind of Amazon's when Amazon tried to make their AI recruitment, which basically they used like their 10 years worth of existing employees to kind of sift through to shortlist applicants, and then eventually they found out actually they're downgrading women, because everyone in the firm were kind of like white men from Harvard or Stanford or somewhere, MIT. And so it's learned from their CVs. And then anytime it said, women's chess club captain or something, it would kind of downgrade their resume or their CV. We all know about that. But what I found interesting is even in with like ChatGPT and large language models, it's still kind of happening. And so I found this quite interesting. It's like, I mean, take this one. Who are the top 10 most famous philosophers? And ChatGPT would just give a list of Western philosophers, and it comes back to this kind of the idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? What you train your model is what you're going to get out of it. So when I was in the BRC, I was getting involved in obviously lots of PPI coding, lots of PPI, getting involved in various projects in neuroscience and that kind of stuff. But obviously I was still interested in data science and doing various data sciencey projects. And so what I'll focus on now is those, and I'll spend the bulk of the time on kind of explaining how I involve the community in various projects, and kind of some of the challenges, and I guess we can spend the rest of the time, if you have any questions, we can go through them. So in about 2017 or 2018, you might know Matteo Cella. He was already working on this project about investigating, using Twitter data, or using Twitter to investigate mental health stigma. And so I think this was already happening, and I was kind of pulled in. I mean, I can't remember why I was pulled in, maybe to make some figures, or I don't know, something. But the idea is that these two medical students had pulled lots of tweets, and they were showing how mental health problems, mental health conditions like schizophrenia, and I don't know, various other mental health conditions are stigmatized more on Twitter. And I thought that was very interesting, and I thought, rather than doing this manually, like rather than classifying each of these tweets manually as whether they're stigmatizing or not, maybe we should ask a computer to do it. And it also got me thinking, like, who is defining stigma? Like, like maybe if I haven't experienced psychosis, then how do I know, like, how do I know what that feels like, and then what is stigmatizing to me, right? So the data were very subjective, So while I was kind of helping on this project, I thought, well, let's see if a computer can do it. And at the same time, these principles had come out, like these CPES, community principles of ethical data sharing, and it all kind of happened at the same time. CPES, they published this guide of data values and principles, all about kind of ethical data sharing, ethical data science. And a lot of these principles reminded me of kind of what we do in PPI. So using data to improve lives, making things reproducible, build teams with diverse ideas and backgrounds, prioritize the continuous collection and availability of discussions and metadata, identify the questions and objectives that drive the project. That was kind of what we do in when we're doing our PPI, when we're looking at research priorities, making sure that the work we're doing is relevant. So recognizing bias. So a lot of this stuff was kind of happening at the same time. I thought, okay, it would be interesting to take that project and see if we can create a classifier. And while creating a classifier, how can we involve service users? How can they support the the modeling pipeline? Now, this was just the CPES you could sign it. So I was one of the early signatories of this thing. I don't know if it's still, I'm sure it's still published and open. Anyway, so it took a few years, but in 2022 we published this paper, and what I want to spend most of the time doing is kind of going through the steps of how I involve service users in kind of taking that initial piece of work in 2018 to creating a classifier that can automate this process of identifying stigmatizing tweets. So you'll see in the method section of that paper, we kind of pointed out how we involved service users at each point. So if you remember point 1, I can't remember exactly where it was, but we then said, okay, we used our data to identify schizophrenia onto it in accordance with concerns that service users had about stigma. They're the ones defining what stigma means. It wasn't me sitting in a lab or some RAs or something like that. Point 3, people with lived experience of mental health services designed the study, collected and analysed the data. Our team was mixed in terms of gender and ethnicity. Now, I'm not saying, the CPEDs at various points, I think at 15 something, I'm not saying we addressed all of them, but I just wanted to show that in how did we go about looking at the CPEDs, looking at these principles and applying PPI principles to that. And a lot of this was done with the PPI group. So the YPAG, Young Persons Mental Health Advisory Group, I used to facilitate this group while I was there, and it's an amazing bunch of young people who some of you might know them, might have even spoken to them. But when I was there, we used to meet kind of every 4 to 6 weeks on a Saturday in central London, and researchers would come and talk to the group about their project and get feedback and get opinions. And I took this project to them and I said, look, guys, we've done this piece of work in 2018. We manually classify tweets as stigmatizing. I want to look at how we can involve service users and create this kind of participatory modeling pipeline. In brief, what they did in one part was looked at features. I'll come back to this, but I just wanted to kind of give you the main point before people drift off, is that we asked them to look at tweets, and they identified 4 out of the 10 features we used in the model, which was number of numeric characters in a tweet, punctuation, number of uppercase words, number of hashtags in a tweet. And when we analyzed whether the number of, for example, punctuation is greater in tweets that are classed as stigmatizing or not, we found 2 of those 4 were. So now I'm not saying that without them we wouldn't have made a model, but I just found it interesting how service users would look at the same thing that me and some of the RAs or other people would, and they look at in a different, they bring kind of different perspective onto it. So I'll explain a bit more detail what that meant. So the first thing we did was with this project was we had to create the training data set, right? So we connected to Twitter. We used to, it's obviously X now, but at the time it was Twitter, and they had an API and the rest of it, so we could pull tweets quite easily. It was I'm only going to focus on the psychosis part, but we pulled I think we had various keywords: schizophrenia, psychosis, schizophrenia, which we had used in the first paper. So I used those keywords. And then we had two service user researchers who separately rated the tweets for stigma. So we said, okay, here's a bunch of tweets. Can you tell me if you think they're stigmatizing or not? And I just made a kind of, arbitrary rating scale. No, it's not stigmatizing. Yes, it is. Or if you rate it as 1, it's potentially stigmatizing. So we can have a conversation about that. So for example, some of the tweets were: psychosis can wax and wane of an hourly, daily, weekly basis, Benedict says. And that was the tweet. So often there's not much context, but based on what you're faced with, what would somebody with lived experience say? Okay, this is not stigmatizing. That was the consensus. What about this? Had to call the police on a schizo in my building's parking garage. Could be somewhat stigmatizing. There was discussion about that. This was another tweet. Every time I get up to go to the bathroom, my co-worker stares at me and freaks out because she thinks I'm going to a secret meeting she's not invited to. Imagine being that psychotic. This was universally agreed that this was a stigmatizing tweet. And then there'd be kind of, the random, Daily Mail ads or something, which in the grand scheme of things, 2 service users thought actually is stigmatizing. So that was one part in terms of classifying the data set, as I mentioned earlier, like who's doing that classifying. And then I thought, actually, it's still quite subjective, right? It's still two people doing that. So I thought, well, let's take any discrepancies and do some more kind of work to create this training data set. So where we had discrepancies, we had two other services researchers decide on a final rating for each tweet. So what that meant was we took a tweet for whatever the tweet was, for example, where there was a discrepancy, we would ask a second person to rate it. By the way, we did this for like depression, anxiety, OCD. So that's why, you'll see this was an example from the depression data set. But the principle is that wherever there's discrepancy, we ask an independent rater to review it. And it's a bit like qualitative work, right? If you're doing thematic coding, you often get a third person to check over your codes, or in systematic reviews, if two people think a paper should be in or out, you'll get a third person. So similar to that. But then the other thing we did was where a service researcher verified the ratings on a sample of tweets, a service researcher verified the ratings on a sample of tweets. So what that meant was I randomly selected, I don't know, I think 100, and said to a completely independent service researcher, do you agree with this rating or not? So it was like this, we gave them this list is psychotic. Our classification is 2. Do you agree? Yes or no? And remember, there was no at the time of doing, there was no literature on this, right? I was kind of just trying to go through the CPED's principles and create a training set that's grounded in experience. So in the end, we got a training data set, and then you do your machine learning. So this is the part that probably you guys do day in, day out and do very well. Your 80-20 split, you do all the kind of pre-processing. I don't know whether I should I did put some slides in about kind of what it means, like vectorizing and stuff. I don't know whether we should maybe I will, just for the sake of completeness sake. So let's say once you've got your data set, you have to kind of convert the text into numbers. So because a computer can only understand and read numbers and do machine learning on numbers. So let's say this was a tweet. I think I've got OCD sentences with punctuations trouble my soul. The first thing you often do is remove punctuation. You get rid of the full stops, commas, and semicolons and that kind of stuff. And then you do tokenization. So each word becomes a token, an entity within itself. And then you can often get rid of stop words. So these are kind of your generic words like I, I've. So you're left with kind of the words with meaning. And then you do something called lemmatize. So you reduce the word to its lowest canonical form. I think that's the word. So like thinking would become think, and the shortest root form of the word. And then once you've got this new tweet, this was a tweet, but this is what it is. And the idea is that you're doing this to get rid of noise, right? It's all about signal to noise, and you could probably still make out what the sentiment of this sentence was, of this tweet was, with after you've done these pre-processing steps. Then what you'd get is a vectorized form. So each of these words becomes a column. Think OCD sentence without punctuation, trouble soul. And in this tweet, each row is a tweet. So here in this first tweet, which is this one, think appeared once, get appeared once, and let's say in our case, this was classified as a 1. Now, let's say there's a tweet, the second tweet said, think mental health. Maybe it was classified as a 0, but therefore it's a new tweet. So we need a new row and we need new columns because we've got 2 new words. So mental health would now appear as 2 new columns. And we know that the first tweet doesn't have those words. So there's 0 here. And then this second tweet becomes a second row. Think appears once, and mental health. This is a kind of very basic form of vectorizing. There's very kind of complicated and advanced methods, which I'm sure you guys know and know of. But for example, in the Twitter paper, we didn't use this method. We used another method, which actually we did discuss with the YPAG. So you could, at every stage of the machine learning pipeline, you can discuss, okay, what is the best way and why? And often that means explaining various things, explaining why you're doing something. So once we're in this position, we think, okay, what other information from this tweet would be useful? This comes back to the feature engineering slide I showed where the YPAG said, punctuation might be useful, or the number of, words that are in uppercase, that kind of stuff. So the literature will often say things like, oh, average, calculate the average word length or the number of words in the tweet. So this is 8, this tweet had 8 words, this tweet had 3 words. It might be useful to classifying something, it might not be, but let's put it in. So coming back to what the white pack said, actually, when I gave them those sets of tweets to look at and kind of just give their opinion on, they were saying actually the number of numeric characters in a tweet was interesting, because they would find sometimes people would swear but would use like the number 4 instead of an A, or an 8 instead of an A, and often the fact that there was a swear word or a word in kind of caps lock would imply stigma or trivialization. They'd often use punctuation, so like, oh, you psycho person with like 16 exclamation marks, or you might just say you're psycho with 16 exclamation marks, and the fact that there's 16 contributed, they would say, actually, this makes me feel like it's a stigmatizing tweet. So a lot of this stuff was through that qualitative appraisal, like discussion of what the words mean, and then what they're telling me in terms of, oh, the fact that there's more exclamation marks, it makes me feel like stigmatizing. So therefore, okay, can we write some code that then extracts the number of punctuations, and what is that punctuation? And you obviously can therefore go deeper and deeper. But like I said, of the various features they mentioned, we used 4, and 2 of them, were allowed us to kind of distinguish between stigmatizing and non-stigmatizing tweets. So once you've done your machine learning, once you got your training set, you've done your vectorizing, you make your classifier, and then you test your model. Now, when it came to testing, this was another thing I spoke to the YPAG about. So, I went back to them and said, okay, machine learning models, there's various ways to evaluate the data. There's accuracy and that was the main thing, that's what I was talking about, area under the curve, accuracy. And then said, well, and then I kind of, when I was explaining like false negatives, false positives, and they said, actually, false negatives is more interesting to them, because what they thought was, depending on the application, if the computer's predicted no, but the tweet is actually stigmatizing, the fact that the tweet is actually stigmatizing, but the computer has picked that up, should be the primary metric that we focus on in terms of evaluating a model. So in this paper, we're arguing that, okay, depending on the use case, in our case, the idea was that, if you can make an automatic classifier, can you then have a feature in Twitter, for example, that you can switch on that would hide any of these like stigmatizing tweets? And if that was the case, then service users said, well, actually, then we don't want to miss information, and if we're saying no, but the tweet is actually stigmatizing, then we're going to see anyway. So, it doesn't matter about the accuracy. False negatives is the better evaluation metric we should focus on. So, actually, in the first version we submitted, we only put false negatives, but obviously after peer review and stuff, we have to add all these other stuff. But the point again here is that how, when you're talking to service users, they will advise, actually, we think this, and this is why. And there's often a level of kind of like explaining, okay, this is what machine learning is, this is what vectorizing is, this is why we want your opinion, because there's a thing called feature engineering, and we can extract what you're telling us, we can try to extract it from the data we have and use it as variables in the model. Even when you're discussing evaluation metrics, we'd have to kind of explain what is a confusion matrix and what a false positive. I mean, a lot of people would know this, but depending, it's often good to kind of set the background, so everyone's kind of advising from the same knowledge base. There's another, we did a couple of other things for validation. This is coming back to the bias issue. We did some blind, so we pulled another 1,000 tweets and separate them in 500 batches, and we asked a service user to blind rate them. This is what the computer said, but we're not going to tell you. Do you agree or not? And unblind, this is what the computer said. Do you agree? Having known after you see it. So I guess the idea is that there was no kind of literature like, oh, we can open a textbook and it will say, okay, this is how you involve service users in this machine learning pipeline. It was kind of me talking to the YPAG, talking to the PPI, people in the PPI team, and friends and colleagues and stuff, and kind of finding ways on how to apply various principles to that. So so far, what I was thinking about is how do patients and versus the literature, or what we know computationally, how do they differ? How can we extract features? Um, how can service users advise on other NLP or machine learning techniques? I've just kind of given one example, but in the work you're doing, probably just think about, can they contribute in a different way or in some other way? And importantly, how can service users be embedded elsewhere in the machine learning pipeline? One thing to think, and the next piece of work I did was based on this kind of thing. So one thing to note is that, especially when you're using social media data, is companies can do what they want. Now the X API isn't as available as it was, in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, when we were doing lots of this work. So it's important to kind of factor that into your PPI as well. As a side note, doesn't need to be the central thing, but how much of what services say is related to the broad task versus specifically to the data set or the data collection pipeline, and kind of factoring that in. So on the back of the schizophrenia work, I applied for this. It's called the Inspire grant from Alzheimer's Research UK, and it was a kind of a collaboration with the dementia theme in the BRC, and the dementia theme have a carers group. So I said, okay, let's do something similar. Let's see if we can identify dementia misconceptions on Twitter with the help of carers. So, we sat with a group of carers, we looked at some tweets, and the first thing I did was just what is Twitter like with dementia content, and you'd see the same kind of thing. Some are positive and some are kind of informing people of treatments or therapies, or just positive tweets, and some are negative. Anybody who believes anything you say is insane and demented as you are, Donald Trump. So it was similar to the schizophrenia kind of landscape. So I thought, okay, this might work. But now, do you remember in the schizophrenia work, I just used the keywords that were from the previous paper. For the dementia piece of work, I thought, actually, rather than just using what the literature says, rather than searching Twitter for dementia, dement star, let's see what carers think. Let's define search terms with them. So the first set of PPI was actually, before I even collect any data, let's find out what should we be collecting. So we asked them to kind of think about various terms, and we looked at the literature, and the literature was covering all this kind of stuff. It would tell us, dementia and memory loss, there was some kind of overlap. And the carers would kind of say stories about, oh yeah, my partner, or my dad's been called, something like this, and I often see that on Twitter, loony bin. But if we hadn't spoken to them, then we wouldn't have known to include that in the search terms. So this was another way of incorporating service user views in the machine learning pipeline before you even get to the stage where you're collecting data. Find out what should you be collecting, basically. And then similarly, they helped us categorize the tweets. They helped us with feature engineering. So in this case, carers identified 18 features. So 13 were for misconceptions. So for example, carers associated the words demented and senile as belonging to misconception tweets. And they also said, actually, wherever you see Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi mentioned, they're often associated with misconceptions. And again, this is all kind of sitting, around a table with this group of carers, with service users, talking to them, having an open discussion about their experiences, and kind of taking in what they're saying and thinking with your computational brain, okay, can I capture what they're saying and convert it into lines of code that will extract what they're saying to contribute to my data set? In the carers case, 9 of the 18 significantly distinguished misconceptions from neutral tweets, which was quite good, and again, I'm not saying that if we didn't speak to carers, we wouldn't have had a model. We just, having spoken to carers, we have a different perspective where we've got 9 features that contribute. And then based on that, we created a campaign, which we published to Twitter. So, we sat around a table and then kind of discussed, okay, if we're going to deploy this campaign. So part of the funding was to deploy a campaign and try to engage people. like to kind of understand or minimize stigmatizing content. Anyway, I won't go into that in the interest of time because I want to now talk about some of the work now. So since doing this work, I've moved into kind of global health and global mental health. And one thing I realized is that context matters. So up until now, I've been thinking of it from a very Western perspective, thinking about PPI and mental health from a very Western perspective. I'm leading a project called Transform. It's called Transforming Access to Care for Serious Mental Disorders like schizophrenia and MDD, with people living with these conditions from the slums in Nigeria and Bangladesh. So, we're based in here where the study is held. One site is in Ibadan in Nigeria, one site's in Dhaka. So there's two elements here. Like these are very, very different landscapes and cultures and ideas, not just geographically and culturally, but also in kind of help seeking. So a lot of the time, people from these cultures will see a faith or traditional healer for mental health care, and that's normal. That's seen as normal. So again, thinking about that context from a language perspective, I was on Twitter and I saw this tweet which went viral. This is this guy. It was a long thread, and he was talking about how he moved to Ukraine, he got a job, and essentially he was hearing voices, he was experiencing psychosis, and he was basically documenting everything that was happening in this kind of long thread, this long Twitter thread, and I was looking at the comments, and I just kind of categorize the comments in two aspects. You get examples of people supporting a biomedical approach. You need help. You need to see a doctor. Basically, you need to see a psychiatrist. We understand that this might be if you'd like to speak with a counselor, kindly send a DM to us. This is from a Mentally Aware Nigeria channel. And there'd be people then supporting a faith-based approach. Go to see this pastor, read this chapter in the Bible or the Quran, pray. And then I was thinking, well, I automatically thought this was right. You should go see a psychiatrist. But actually, now working in global health and understanding different perspectives, there's, how do we kind of respect culture and respect cultural norms while maintaining kind of, a medical approach or making sure people get help? And I haven't quite solved that. So, this is kind of, trying to do PPI with people locally to understand, okay, well, what if they do pray? Will that make people better? Then how do we kind of factor that in? But actually people need treatment. So it's a kind of a whole different approach. And the second thing is data collection. So when I started working on this project, so the project is essentially trying to get people with serious mental illness who live in the slum mental health care. And part of this is, can we predict how bad they're going to be or how bad the mental health symptoms are going to be based on various things like the duration of untreated psychosis or various other scores. So I'm in a position now that even before I can do any modeling, I need to think about data collection. Like, how am I even going to get data from these places, So I have to think more broadly. Okay, I need a system where it's open source, it's compatible in these countries. Sometimes the internet, we don't get 4G, 5G in slums in Dhaka and in Ibadan. So we need something that will work offline, that's encrypted, because we have ethics and all these other responsibilities. Depending on how much we want to model, we need a system that will capture location, because we know that location can contribute to or predict things like depression. Do you want to capture voice, video? Has to be easy to understand. It has to be we have to be able to kind of translate mental health concepts to the local language. In Nigeria, speak Yoruba. How easy will it be to translate things like psychosis or hearing voices to the local language? And it needs to be secure. Anyway, so now I'm going down this kind of route of understanding, well, what's available. There's, various softwares, in the end, I deployed something called Open Data Kit Collect, and it's an app, it's open source. You configure it for your study and you can do various things. In this case, you collect your data and then, you get that data from a CSV file. But all of these questions I mentioned here, was done through PPIE. Okay. What is the best way for you, not just with services, but also the research teams? So the PPI can be done, the participation, the involvement side is done at a patient level, but also depending on the context can be done at the staff level, can be done at any end user level. So rather than so I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that depending on your use case, apply those PPIE principles to your research problem, your research study, your research case. Those are my conclusions, I guess. That was the one take-home message. Whatever those PPI principles are, apply them to your specific study. It's not a kind of one size fits all. Like I've shown, basic principles can exist, with like the CPEDs, but you have to apply them. If you're doing, we were just talking about voicing, there might be voice, you might be doing a work on voice or speech. Apply those PPI principles to speech, speak to advisory groups, speak to people who have experienced the condition that you're working on and understand how does your voice differ in X, Y, and Z time frame. So anyway, I'll stop there and maybe we'll open up to questions. And should I stop sharing now so I can see you guys as well? Is that all right?
Yes, I do. I would like. Thanks very much. Thanks very
Yeah.
much, Sagar. Excellent talk. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
I think that we already have one question or comment. I think Lauren would like to say something. So Lauren, go for it.
Hi, thanks. Thanks so much for this talk. It was really, really interesting. It's really good to hear a bit about this. I was just wondering, like, whether you found that there's many challenges with explaining some modeling concepts to service users, and whether you have any advice with this, or if it's not really been an issue.
So yes and no. So with the YPAG, for example, a lot of the members were, they were at uni, they were technically savvy, like they were technically minded, and so it was challenging to some extent. But I never really needed to explain like extremely technical concepts like this vectorization. There's like TF, IDF, and there's various. We don't need to go to that level. We just need to explain. Actually, this is the point of vectorizing, is to convert the text into numbers. This is what a 2 by 2 is, confusion matrix, false positives, and they kind of knew about that type 1 error, type 2 error, because they were studying psychology or whatever they were studying at the time. Actually, and it was actually COVID time as well, so people were hearing about type 1, type 2 error all the time, on the news. So yes and no. Well, on the back of doing all this PPI work for some of this work, we didn't get around to it, but I really wanted to create like a glossary or like a manual or some kind of output where, we could explain, like develop explanations to, AI concepts, and that could just be published, available. And that never happened, because lockdown happened, and then I think the world kind of changed and, whatnot. But I'd be very interested if, other people are, kind of doing some PPI work and mapping out, this is a term, I don't know, supervised machine learning, for example, deep learning. Let's translate that into, what it means in lay language.
Yeah.
So
I think it would be quite interesting to involve service users themselves with that process, like with defining things and like, does this make sense? Like, because I think it's obviously great if you've got university students or people from very technical backgrounds, but obviously you're not always working with people even in academia, and you want to reach people who are outside of this sort of bubble that we're in. So thank you. That's really, really interesting. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great. It's certainly a big topic. How do you get sort of people up to speed in a kind of digestible way? Do we have any other questions? I've got a question if nobody is ready just yet. Sagar, thank you. That was just a great talk. There was so many interesting things that I could ask you about now, but instead I'll go with a general question. A lot of our audience will probably be early career researchers, so PhD students, and especially for people sort of focused on modeling, a lot of them might be computer scientists, data scientists, sort of without that psychiatry background. Is there any advice you'd give them for, just getting started, getting involved in incorporating service users, patients into their work?
I think what I realize is, you guys in the BRC are very lucky, especially at the Maudsley, that the kind of PPI infrastructure at the Maudsley is, so good. And one thing I had to do was kind of just drop everything I know and like just say, look, I actually don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to not necessarily wing it, but I'm going to be open to ideas and kind of ask people for help at every single stage, and then figure out what's the best way to do this. So it was kind of like PPI of PPI, if you know what I mean. It's like, there were various options, and then, okay, let me take X, Y, and Z to the PPI group to then get the outcome I want. So I think, first of all, the first thing to do is kind of just, we have to accept that this is, I don't know anything. Let me just start fresh, and then be very open about kind of your, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, we have to drop our ego basically and just say, look, I don't know anything. Can you help me? And how can you help me is the best. I don't even know how I can get help. So, can you even, advise on how I can even get help? It was like that. So I think, babe, just get involved and use all your amazing resources that you have there.
And just start, so starting early is a big thing. Yeah. So I've got a question from Sho there. Hi, Sho.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was like really amazing to see how you used PPIE throughout the development and kind of analysis, etc. I guess I was just wondering, in terms of your outputs, I guess both, like, more kind of journal academic outputs, but also maybe other outputs and shared learning from it. Like, how easy was it to explain to reviewers and editors, etc. I guess like your methodology, and I guess sometimes obviously there's like lots of gold standard guidelines in terms of how you might report like RCTs, for example, but probably slightly less so in terms of public patient involvement. And I guess I think you've already alluded to, like maybe in the slide you had to add extra columns because the reviewer said you needed extra columns. Yeah, and then also, like, there's probably other really, sorry, I'm rambling on a bit, but there's probably other like really lovely gold nuggets of like feedback that you got from your group that you might not have been able to kind of put in the paper or kind of publish in any way. So just like like ways of sharing that wealth of kind of expertise and knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, so the first part is, yes, certainly, like, the explaining participatory modeling in that first paper was very interesting. It was like, well, what's the point? Like, the kind of reviewers were like, well, what's the point? Like, what are you doing? But then framing it around kind of CPEDs, for us, that those principles, framing it around those principles, and then saying, okay, these principles. So basically, it was like you have to take literature and apply your PPI to the literature, rather than just say we did X, Y, and Z. Because sometimes with PPIs, you could say, okay, we spoke to a group of people, and they suggested X, Y, and Z, and therefore we did X, Y, and Z, right? And to the in that Lancet Nature Partner Journal paper, that didn't fly basically. So we had to kind of ground it in. Okay, these principles exist, and based on these principles, we applied our PPI, and that's why in the method section, you'll see, I put the slides of the screenshots from the paper, like 0.1, service users classify the tweets, 0.9, like that. So we had to kind of get our point across, but in a very academically systematic way, in a way that reviewers and academics are used to seeing. This is the reference, and we applied that. And then in terms of kind of small nuggets, I would say every time you sit around a table with like services, a PPI meeting, they get like so much will come out. People will say stuff, and it's like your mind will explode, and so there's so much that can't go in a paper, and probably stuff I don't even remember now, because it's kind of, the meetings are minuted, right? And you can obviously take your own notes, and there'll be things that will stick in your mind and stuff like that. But it's kind of, once you're kind of immersed, in PPIE, and you're talking to service users about the thing, it becomes just like a conversation having with friends. So it just becomes second nature. So it's not like there's anything that is going to stick in my mind. It will just change the way you're thinking, basically, and because you change the way you're thinking, it will just change the way you do stuff, naturally. So yeah, probably not. I can't think of any specific examples, but that may help.
Thanks, Thanks, Sagar. Yeah, we've got Christoph. Yeah, Christoph.
Yes, yes. Hello, hi. I'm I'm a dementia researcher, and I sometimes really struggle with PPI because I guess you have of course, carers for people with dementia who engage with all of this, but I guess while their relative with dementia is still alive, they're often far too busy to do anything than care for them, and and after they've passed away, they're often too they prioritize other things. So I feel I've never really gone past more that advisory role and in research studies. I don't know if you had any experience or ideas how you could get carers for people with dementia to dive a bit deeper and become really co-produce research.
Christoph, it's probably, again, it's based on what the thing that you want to do is, your research question. But I know, I don't know if you just have something, a group called Malady.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And I guess I know Andrew Cornwall quite well,
okay.
but I guess there's only one Andrew Cornwall.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I got lucky because I just kind of leveraged onto this existing group and and the staff that were working there at the time, and they kind of set everything up for me to just kind of walk in and talk to them about this idea, about misconceptions and misinterpretations. So it was it was, I guess, a lot easier for me. But I guess if you have to set a group up, is that what you're asking, like setting up a group or getting them to engage?
Yeah. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
setting up a group and I guess
Yeah.
getting them to come to a meeting every 3 months and discuss a little bit about research is fine, but getting them just even more engaged into a research study.
Yeah. So one thing that helped was very specific tasks. Like so like I remember in Malady, the first meeting was it was just like, this is what I want to do, guys. Look, there's a misconception. I showed them on Twitter, like live. I went on my laptop and I said, look, let me search dementia. And I just scrolled down and said, look, to me that's stigmatizing. Do you think, like, just engage them in that way and told them what the concept of. Then the next meeting, it was like, okay, I'm going to bring a list of tweets. Can you just write yes or no, like 1 or 0? And then after you've done that, the next half an hour, can we just have a chat about why you think that? It was giving kind of very specific tasks, and that helped them really engage. Maybe that might be, useful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Great. I've probably got time just for one last question. Victoria.
Hi, great. Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed, especially the talk of how your use case changes your accuracy metric. That's something I'm quite interested in. But I specifically wanted to ask about your transform study. How do you take into account the differences in your PPI cohort compared to, because I imagine the service users are very different.
Very different,
yeah.
Culture, it's a complete, like I have to drop what I know about mental health and psychiatry completely, just leave it at the door, because the what's normal for us is not normal everywhere. And I think that's what hit me when I first started working in global health. Like we would just assume you go to a psychiatrist and psychiatrists are available. And then I realized, oh, there's a massive treatment gap. I think in England we have one psychiatrist per 100, 200 people. In like Nigeria, there's one psychiatrist per 100,000 people, kind of thing. So the norm is, let's go to a faith healer. And also it subscribes to their culture, like the belief system as well. Like, why do people hear voices? Because it's a spiritual attack. It's caused by a demon, like those kinds of things. And obviously it's, so it's about kind of being respectful and at the same time getting advice for your study, because fundamentally we need to calculate DU, for example. So we need to calculate something called duration of untreated psychosis. So we need to get the history. So alongside all of that, they're talking about a demon attack. Can I interpret that as, something that will contribute to me capturing duration of untreated psychosis? Do you mean? So it's all kind of, you just have to be more open-minded in a way, but the culture and context is very different.
So you do have specific service users from
of course,
those.
yeah.
Okay,
yeah, they're in Ibadan in Nigeria, and they're in Dhaka. Yeah, and we have research teams in Ibadan and in Dhaka that kind of coordinate all of this stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. I can send my slides to you, Raquel. If I saw some people asking the references, then you can just share the slides and the references.
That would be fantastic, and we can also share it in our Teams channel so that everyone can download and get the references. Thanks very much, Sagar.
Sounds good. Okay.
I assume that was the last question. So now it's 4 o'clock. So let's finish this first seminar on PPI here at King's. So thanks very much. I would say, so this is going to be our first and last of the year. We will be back early 2025 with the prediction modeling and machine learning seminars and the PPI. So you will be very welcome to join us in January. So thanks very much, and actually happy Christmas to everyone, because I won't see you. And thanks, Sagar, for the talk.
You're welcome, guys. Thanks very much. Okay, I'll send them over.
Thank you so much, Sagar.
Thank you.
That was great.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
All the best. Bye. Thanks, everyone.